Welcome back to Major Antonio's presentation of London to Ladysmith via Pretoria by Winston S. Churchill. Today, 125 years ago, the future Prime Minister reported from the fronts of the Boer War in South Africa. We shall follow his footsteps as he narrates his adventures himself. Subscribe to our channel so as not to miss anything. Chapter 21, Hussar Hill. General Buller's Headquarters, February 15, 1900.
When Sir Redvers Buller broke off the combat of Valkrantz, and for the third time ordered his unbeaten troops to retreat, it was clearly understood that another attempt to penetrate the Boer lines was to be made without delay. The army has moved from Spearman's and Springfield to Shively. General Littleton, who had succeeded Sir Francis Cleary in command of the 2nd Division and 4th Brigade, marching via Pretorius's farm on the 9th and 10th, Sir Charles Warren covering the withdrawal of the supplies and transport, and following on the 10th and 11th. The regular cavalry brigade under Burn Murdoch was left with 2 battalions to hold the bridge at Springfield, beyond which place the Boers, who had crossed the Tugela in some strength at Potgieters, were reported to be showing considerable activity. The left flank of the marching infantry columns was covered by Dundonald's brigade of light horse, and the operations were performed without interruption from the enemy. On the 12th, orders were issued to reconnoiter Hussar Hill, a grassy and wooded eminence 4 miles to the east of Chively, and the direction of the next attack was revealed. The reader of the accounts of this war is probably familiar with the Colenso position and understands its great strength. The proper left of this position rests on the rocky, scrub-covered hill of Langwani, which rises on the British side of the Tugela. If this hill can be captured and artillery placed on it, and if it can be secured from crossfire, then all the trenches of Fort Wiley and along the river bank will be completely enfiladed, and the Colenso position will become untenable, so that Hlangwani is the key of the Colenso position. In order, however, to guard this key carefully, the Boers have extended their left. As at Trickhart's Drift, they extended their right, until it occupies a very lofty range of mountains 4 or 5 miles to the east of Hlangwani. And along all this front, works have been constructed on a judicious system of defense. The long delays have given ample time to the enemy to complete his fortifications, and the trenches here are more like forts than field works, being provided with overhead cover against shells and carefully made loopholes. In front of them stretches a bare slope. On either side rise formidable hills from which long-range guns can make a continual crossfire. Behind this position, again, are others of great strength. But there are also encouraging considerations. We are to make, at least in spite of disappointments we hope and believe we are to make, a supreme effort to relieve Ladysmith. At the same time, we are the army for the defense of South Natal. If we had put the matter to the test at Potgieters and failed, our line of communications might have been cut behind us, and the whole army, weakened by the inevitable heavy losses of attacking these great positions, might have been captured or dispersed. Here we have the railway behind us. We are not as we were at Potgieters, formed to a flank. We derive an accession of strength from the fact that the troops holding railhead are now available for the general action. Besides these inducements, this road is the shortest way. Buller, therefore, has elected to lose his men and risk defeat, without which risk no victory can be won, on this line. Whether he will succeed or not were foolish to prophesy, but it is the common belief that this line offers as good a chance as any other, and that at last the army will be given a fair run, and permitted to begin a general engagement and fight it out to the end. If Buller goes in and wins, he will have accomplished a wonderful feat of arms and will gain the lasting honor and gratitude of his country. If he is beaten, he will deserve the respect and sympathy of all true soldiers as a man who has tried to the best of his ability to perform a task for which his resources were inadequate. I hasten to return to the chronicle. Hussar Hill, so called because a small post of the 13th Hussars was surprised on it 6 weeks ago and lost 2 men killed, is the high ground opposite Hlangwani and the mountainous ridges called Monte Cristo and Singolo, on which the artillery must be posted to prepare the attack. Hence the reconnaissance of the 12th. At 8 o'clock, we never get up early in this war, Lord Dundonald started from the cavalry camp near Stewart's farm with the South African Light Horse, the Composite Regiment, Thornycroft's Mounted Infantry, the Colt Battery, 1 battalion of infantry, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, and a battery of field artillery. The irregular horse were familiar with the ground, and we soon occupied Hussar Hill, driving back a small Boer patrol which was watching it, and wounding 2 of the enemy. A strong picket line was thrown out all round the captured ground, and a dropping musketry fire began at long range with the Boers, who lay hidden in the surrounding dongas. At noon, Sir Redvers Buller arrived and made a prolonged reconnaissance of the ground with his telescope. At 1 o'clock, we were ordered to withdraw, and the difficult task of extricating the advanced pickets from close contact with the enemy was performed under a sharp fire, fortunately without the loss of a man. After you leave Hussar Hill on the way back to Shively Camp, it is necessary to cross a wide dip of ground. We had withdrawn several miles in careful rearguard fashion. The guns and the battalion had gone back, and the last 2 squadrons were walking across this dip towards the ridge on the homeward side. Perhaps we had not curled in our tail quite quick enough, or perhaps the enemy has grown more enterprising of late. In any case, just as we were reaching the ridge, a single shot was fired from Hussar Hill, and then without more ado, a loud crackle of musketry burst forth. The distance was nearly 2,000 yards, but the squadrons in close formation were a good target. Everybody walked for about 20 yards, and then without the necessity of an order broke into a brisk canter, opening the ranks to a dispersed formation at the same time. It was very dry weather, and the bullets striking between the horsemen raised large spurts of dust so that it seemed that many men must surely be hit. Moreover, the fire had swelled to a menacing roar. I chanced to be riding with Colonel Byng in rear, and looking round saw that we had good luck, for though bullets fell among the troopers quite thickly enough, the ground 200 yards further back was all alive with jumping dust. The Boers were shooting short. We reached the ridge and cover in a minute, and it was very pretty to see these irregular soldiers stop their horses and dismount with their carbines at once without any hesitation. Along the ridge, Captain Hill's Colt Battery was drawn up in line, and as soon as the front was clear, the 4 little pink guns began spluttering furiously. The whole of the South African Light Horse dismounted and, lining the ridge, opened fire with their rifles. Thornycroft's Mounted Infantry came into line on our left flank and brought 2 tripod Maxims into action with them. Lord Dundonald sent back word to the battery to halt and fire over our heads, and Major Gough's regiment and the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, who had almost reached cover, turned round of their own accord and hurried eagerly in the direction of the firing, which had become very loud on both sides. There now ensued a strange little skirmish, which would have been a bloody rifle duel, but for the great distance which separated the combatants, and for the cleverness with which friends and foes concealed and sheltered themselves. Not less than 400 men on either side were firing as fast as modern rifles will allow. Between us stretched the smooth green dip of ground. Beyond, there rose the sharper outlines of Hussar Hill, 2 or 3 sheds, and a few trees. That was where the Boers were, but they were quite invisible to the naked eye, and no smoke betrayed their positions. With a telescope they could be seen, a long row of heads above the grass. We were equally hidden. Still their bullets, a proportion of their bullets, found us, and I earnestly trust that some of ours found them. Indeed, there was a very hot fire in spite of the range. Yet no one was hit. Ah, yes, there was one. A tall trooper turned sharply on his side, and 2 of his comrades carried him quickly back behind a little house, shot through the thigh. A little further along the firing line, another was being helped to the rear. The Colt Battery drew the cream of the fire, and Mr. Garrett, one of the experts sent out by the firm, was shot through the ankle, but he continued to work his gun. Captain Hill walked up and down his battery, exposing himself with great delight, and showing that he was a very worthy representative of an Irish constituency. I happened to pass along the line on some duty or other when I noticed my younger brother, whose keen desire to take some part in the public quarrel had led me, in spite of misgivings, to procure him a lieutenancy, lying on the ground with his troop. As I approached, I saw him start in the quick, peculiar manner of a stricken man. I asked him at once whether he was hurt, and he said something. He thought it must be a bullet, had hit him on the gaiter and numbed his leg. He was quite sure it had not gone in, but when we had carried him away, we found, as I expected, that he was shot through the leg. The wound was not serious, but the doctors declared he would be a month in hospital. It was his baptism of fire, and I have since wondered at the strange caprice which strikes down one man in his first skirmish and protects another time after time. But I suppose all pitchers will get broken in the end. Outwardly, I sympathized with my brother in his misfortune, which he mourned bitterly, since it prevented him taking part in the impending battle. But secretly, I confess myself well content that this young gentleman should be honorably out of harm's way for a month. It was neither our business nor our pleasure to remain and continue this long-range duel with the Boers. Our work for the day was over, and all were anxious to get home to luncheon. Accordingly, as soon as the battery had come into action to cover our withdrawal, we commenced withdrawing squadron by squadron, and finally broke off the engagement, for the Boers were not inclined to follow further. At about 3 o'clock, our loss in this interesting affair was one officer, Lieutenant John Churchill, and 7 men of the South African Light Horse, wounded, and a few horses. Thornycroft's mounted infantry also had 2 casualties, and there were 2 more in the Colt detachments. The Boers were throughout invisible, but 2 days later, when the ground was revisited, we found 1 dead burgher, so that at any rate they lost more heavily than we. The Colt guns worked very well, and the effect of the fire of a whole battery of these weapons was a marked diminution in the enemy's musketry. They were mounted on the light carriages patented by Lord Dundonald, and the advantage of these in enabling the guns to be run back by hand so as to avoid exposing the horses was very obvious. I shall leave the great operation which, as I write, has already begun, to another letter, but since gaiety has its value in these troublous times, let the reader pay attention to the story of General Hart and the third-class shot. Major General Hart, who commands the Irish Brigade, is a man of intrepid personal courage. Indeed, to his complete contempt for danger, the heavy losses among his battalions, and particularly in the Dublin Fusiliers, must be to some extent attributed. After Colenso, there were bitter things said on this account, but the reckless courage of the general was so remarkable in subsequent actions that, being brave men themselves, they forgave him everything for the sake of his daring. During the first day at Spion Kop, General Hart discovered a soldier sitting safely behind a rock and a long way behind the firing line. "Good afternoon, my man," he said in his most nervous, apologetic voice. "What are you doing here?" "Sir," replied the soldier, "an officer told me to stop here, sir." "Oh, why?" "I'm a third-class shot, sir." "Dear me," said the general after some reflection, "that's an awful pity, because you see you'll have to get quite close to the Boers to do any good. Come along with me and I'll find you a nice place," and a mournful procession trailed off towards the most advanced skirmishers.
This concludes today's reading of London to Ladysmith via Pretoria by Winston S. Churchill. Join us also on February 19th for the subsequent chapter. Subscribe to Major Antonio's channel. Thanks for listening, and so long.